All right, we are returning and we're into February. So always on Mondays when we come to class, I try to check in with our course outline. Remember, it tells us everything we're doing. It tells us what's due today and what we're getting introduced to, what's coming up. So we're going to continue working on Unit 3, where we were introduced to Exercise 2 last class. I think we had one video for it. So we just started the demo in class. And then today we're going to try to finish it off and get it submitted, just like we did Exercise 1 last class. Remember, exercises are just to introduce you to concepts. They're pass-fail. You're trying to get the basic requirements covered, and then I'll show you some extra finishing options. But the point of Exercise 2 is just a quick introduction to vector shapes. Then we move on to Unit 4, which has our first question of the day, which is about digital art versus traditional art, because in this college course, we are not only expected to hands-on learn digital imaging and media, we're also expected to think about it, understand its context in our culture, and we're asked to write and discuss it a little bit. So this first one's about digital art versus traditional art. And you'll see it in Unit 4. And then we're going to start with our first assignment, which is a compositing assignment, but a compositing with other people's photographic pixels. Taking other people's high-resolution photographs and forming it into our own fantasy landscape. And next I'll come around and make sure it's all set up the way you need it to. All right. Assignments are different. I like to put this in the video because this day will be going into our first assignment. They are different than exercises because exercises are worth 2 points and are pass-fail. Assignments are worth 3 points and follow this general rubric. And this is about kind of your professional portfolio work through the semester. So if you miss an assignment deadline, you turn nothing in by the deadline passes, then you get a 0 for that assignment and you're not able to resubmit it. If you turn something in by the deadline, like even if you just do the first aspect of it, like do a little bit of the sketch or a reference image or something that acknowledges that you know the assignment, you're intending to work on it, but you don't meet all the requirements, you'll get 1 point out of 3, which is not a passing grade, but it's something. But more importantly, it means that you got something in by the deadline, which means you acknowledge the deadline, which is like my talking to my art director and saying, if you just give me a little bit more time, I can do something really nice. And they say, okay. So if you acknowledge the deadline with some part of your process, you'll get 1 point, but then you can resubmit any time until the last day of the semester for a new grade. And you will improve at these skills for sure as we go through the semester. You get 2 points if you turn in something that meets all the requirements, but has aspects that can definitely be improved. So that's like an exercise, right? And then you'll see on my exercise comments for Exercise 1, which I scored over the weekend, there might be little improvements I'll suggest, but that doesn't keep you from getting 2 out of 2 points on an exercise because you met all the requirements. On an assignment, sometimes you need to work on it a little bit longer to get the 3 points, which is that it meets all the requirements, but also engages the viewer as art. So for assignment 1, it's a fantasy landscape. You have to use at least 5 different resource images. You have to make it into an original landscape. You're not just mimicking something that already exists. And those are the requirements. But there are better ways to do that, and then there are clunkier ways to do that, right? So you want the finished product for your portfolio that you might print for the midterm or for the final. You want that not to have any like glaring errors to it, right? You want it to really engage so that when your audience looks at it, they don't say, oh, I like that part, but they really needed more time on these areas. And then 3 points is the most you can get for an assignment because we do a lot of them. So we're going to push on with Exercise 2, and then we'll introduce Assignment 1. And the way we do that is we're going to go to Unit 3, where we left off. So let me find our class. So we always check in with the course outline on Mondays, and then we can go right to unit modules, or we can shortcut with assignments. And we're still working with our introduction to vector shapes in Unit 3, and I'll go right to where we're submitting them. So I don't think we've submitted anything except for our little screen grabs. So let's go ahead and submit that. That's the first requirement for this exercise. We used the Emoji Maker website, this one, it's linked here, to make an emoji that maybe relates a little bit to a theme we've chosen. I'm choosing Greek mythology, right? And then what we did was we screen grabbed or exported as a PNG that exercise. And so this was my screen grab. So I can go ahead and post that screen grab and label my theme. And I'll always start a post with my name, and I'll put instructor. And then all I need to do is open up from my folder, which I found in my documents folder, exercise 2, just get that screenshot and post it. And then you want it to be about double the size of your name, no smaller than that, up to 4 times the size of your name. So something like that works well. And then what is my theme? My theme is Greek mythology. This does not look much like Greek mythology yet. So I'll definitely have to make my own decisions. I was thinking about Hades and putting a coin on the tongue, making it more relate to mythology. Well, that's what we did last class. That's our first step. So our second requirement is to now make all those shapes for ourselves. So turn this into our own vector. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to open it up. We're going to follow these directions in Photopea. So we're going to take that emoji screen grab and we're going to open it in Photopea. So the first thing I have to do is open up Photopea. And then I can just drag and drop that file. All right, now let's see what you guys remember about compositing. When you use a screen image or an image from online, it's not going to be very high resolution. And we need these to be print quality, right? So we need our images to be at least what size? 8 by 10 inches. At what resolution? How many pixels per inch? 300 is the minimum for printing. So how do we check that? We go to image immediately and we go to image size. This will be our number of pixels. And this is what Photopea will always show us. It will show us the pixel dimensions, but we don't want the pixel dimensions because we don't speak pixel very well. We want inches. We're Americans. We still go off of a king's thumb measurement for some reason, right? So inches. Mine is 10 by 9. Is that larger than 8 by 10? It is. So that's good. The problem is under pixels per inch, I want it to be at least 300, not 72. So I'm going to type in 300. I'm going to click off on the gray, make sure all those settings are what I want. In order to grow it from screen resolution where we captured it to this print resolution where we're going to build our own shapes, you need to make sure resample is checked. Otherwise, when I put 300 in here, it's just going to shrink down my physical size so that it doesn't have to add more pixels. I want it to add more pixels in this case. So then I say OK. And now that screen grab is going to look pretty fuzzy because the computer had to make up a lot of pixels around those edges. But this is not our project. Our project is going to be using vector shape tools within Photopea or Photoshop if you're doing that, which is what I demoed this morning. And those vector tools, the vector shapes are down near the bottom. You'll see this rectangle. What I want you to do is to click and hold on that until you see all the vector shape tools. And this is one instance where, at least with the default program, Photopea is actually better than Photoshop for its vector shape tools. So I'm going to click on, for mine, if I'm making this in the real world out of cutouts of colored paper, what would be the first cutout shape I would do? Yeah, like the biggest kind of background shape, right? So using the basic shapes like this of the skull, or something like the skull, I'm going to start with the cranium, this ellipse. And I'm just going to drag and drop this big circle. It doesn't need to be perfect. it comes in. Now when you do that, notice what happens. This is a little bit different than when we brought line art into Photopea before. For instance, it's different because it's got a dot in the middle of it, right? And it makes its own layer automatically. That's called a shape layer with a smart object box in the corner. That's a vector signifier. So this is a vector shape. And then at the top, you'll see something that you won't see with any other tools in Photoshop. You'll see that it is a shape, and we want it to be a shape. That shape has two attributes. It has a fill color, right? The default is black. And it has a stroke aspect. Just to make this clear, I'll make it bright yellow and I'll make it pretty big. We are not going to use the stroke aspect on our vector shapes. We are only going to use the fill. But notice that one vector shape can have a black fill and a yellow stroke, or it can have a red stroke and a blue fill. You know, those are all just attributes of that vector. What we want to do, because we're making emojis, is we want to get rid of the stroke. So under the stroke attribute, you want the little red X. It's like a no smoking sign. It means there will be no stroke attributes on any of our shape layers. And then for our color, what's a good skull color? So white's not the best choice, just because if it's on a white background, then it would be invisible, right? But off-white, that could work. Or the gray like it has. How can I actually pick the color exactly? Well, if I double click on the shape vector layer preview window, it will open up a color selector where I can choose the color exactly. And a really nice feature of the color selectors in raster programs is if you just hover over the image, I can actually steal the color directly from my source. Does that make sense? That color is found in this foreground color box. See, if I do blue and I say OK, actually, I guess that's not true for these. But you can always get back to it and you can always copy it. So I'm going to double click there to change its color property. I'm going to change it to that gray. All right, immediately, if I check image size, just to remind myself, I am now at the full print resolution I want. And I have created one element that is really, really clean at that resolution. And you see the little blue outline it has? That tells you it's a vector. That blue is not really there. If I click on another layer, it will disappear. But if I zoom in on this, even though it's a vector shape layer, I will see pixels. And that's because this is still a raster program. But this is a vector shape in a raster program. Which means that if I change the image size, make it something way bigger, this circle, this vector shape, will still be perfectly clean. So the one thing you can't do for this project is rasterize your shape layers. If you do that, then it no longer has any of the advantages of being a scalable vector. All right, the problem is this doesn't really look like my skull yet. And if I start to transform it, which I can do with Option Command T, and right click, and I can warp it, and I can say, well, I need the teeth. It's kind of tricky, or maybe I want it to be a little more lopsided. Hit return. I can do all of that, but how do I get it to look like the skull, especially if I can't see the skull? So immediately after you've made your first layer, I want you to take your background and I want you to duplicate it. How do you duplicate? It's a 2-key shortcut we learned last class. Command J. It's a very helpful one. So Command J gives me an exact copy of that. Now I'm going to take that layer and push it above the shape I made. This is a technique called onion skinning. This is what animators do when they draw. They take the drawing that they just did and they put it underneath the drawing that they're working on somewhat transparent paper. It's called onion skin vellum. And then they draw, and then they